The order. Good morning and Happy New Year. Welcome everybody to the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee. This is our third session on an inquiry looking at affordability of home ownership. My name is Florence Eshlomi and I'm the chair of the committee. Can I ask my committee colleagues to introduce themselves, please? Lewis.
Lewis Cocking, Broxbourne.
Leader and MP for Newbury.
Will Forster, MP for Woking.
Morning, Andrew Lewin, MP for Welling Hatfield.
Sean Woodcock, Banbury.
Chris Curtis, Milton Keynes North.
Can I ask our guests to introduce themselves, please?
Good morning, Happy New Year, and thank you for the invitation to give evidence today. Timothy Douglas, Head of Policy Campaigns at Propertymark, the UK's largest professional membership body for property agents.
I'm Beth Rudolf. I'm the Director of Delivery at the Conveyancing Association, which represents 70 or so of the conveyancers in England, Wales and Scotland, and also co-chair of the Home Buying and Selling Council.
Good morning, Happy New Year, and thank you for the opportunity to come and present evidence to the committee. My name is Joe Pepper. I'm the UK CEO of PEXA, which is a digital electronic conveyancing platform that's widely used in Australia, that we are currently in the process of talking to lenders and conveyancers about a different way of transacting property in the UK at the moment. I've been in that role for 2 years. Prior to that, I've spent the previous decade working predominantly in the property sector, looking at different ways to make the property transaction process work better.
Thank you everyone for coming this morning. And for many people up and down the country, the new year signals the start of maybe finally putting your house on the market, maybe doing that upgrade and moving into a bigger property. But we've seen across our inquiry that the affordability element seems very expensive for so many people across the UK. Just an opening question to our guests. Why is the affordability in the housing mix such a difficult one to fix?
Okay, looking at. Well, I think in terms of certainly, from our estate agent members, the new year does bring, seasonal optimism and do expect the market to pick up. What I would say on reflecting on 2025, sort of industry data we published saw that there was 35,000 more properties put on the market to sell in 2025 than 2024. The average exchange price increased by £4,000 or £5,000, but 9,000 transactions fell through in 2025 compared to 2024, so an additional 9,000. So I think the inquiry is timely, and the UK government's focus on reforms to home buying, selling and material information property listings. In terms of linking it back to affordability, I think, again, reflecting on last year, element of stability and instability. I think stability has come from inflation's coming down. We've had the 4 base rate cuts, but there has been instability in the market in the sense of in April, 2025, the current government didn't retain the increased thresholds for first-time buyers, reducing down from £425,000 to £300,000, and the maximum value relief came down from £65,000 to £500,000 on the 5% portion above 300k. And ultimately, at the lower end of the market, for the general buyer, the nil rate threshold has fallen from 250k to £125,000. So stamp duty is a challenge around affordability that continues to come back from our members. And ultimately, we had another fiscal event in November, and rightly or wrongly, there was speculation around stamp duty reform since August, and that really put pressure on people's decisions, and I would say wasn't helpful moving forward. So we would like more, formal conversations, engagement around stamp duty reform, and I think that would be positive with the government and the sector. So I think stamp duty deposits have increased on average. I think English Housing Survey now up to £78,000 that a first-time buyer will need. But having said that, there is a final point. There is, I think, reflective from our members, a lot of mortgage products out there in the market to help first-time buyers' affordability, but perhaps knowledge of them both amongst the agent community and the consumers is low, and we need to do more to try and educate people around those products.
I think I'd add to that the earnings to price ratio. Of course, people's salaries just aren't going up fast enough to be able to afford properties. The property price increases all the time. However, I know that my co-chair of the Home Buying and Selling Council will be shouting at me if I did not say that actually there are a lot of affordable homes. The problem is that consumer confidence is eradicated by the media. They talk about the standard average house price being 290,000, which yes, it is at Land Registry, but of course that includes the £1 million houses. What is it on average? If I've got my feet in the fridge and my head in the cooker, on average I'm at the right temperature. The reality is that actually in every town there are properties that are affordable, but consumers are just not aware of that. On top of that, we have all of the conversation that goes on about how awful and stressful it is to move house. It's the top of the top 3 most stressful things, and the other 2 are death and divorce. So it's the only one with a positive outcome, theoretically. But the reality is that people lose £1,500, I think Bayes found in their report back in 2016, with fall-throughs. And as Timothy said, 20%, 5% at the moment of transactions don't go ahead because of the lack of information available, because of the complexity of title, and because the material information isn't available to get the right buyer at the right price with the right lender.
And that's what Nationwide said in written evidence to us, that the complexity of the process is also a key barrier putting many people off the home process.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I'd agree with what both Beth and Timothy have said so far. I think affordability breaks down into 2 key areas. One is around the price of the property, and one is about the cost of the transaction. The price of the property is obviously very heavily driven by supply and demand, and that's very well known, and I know that the government and other parties are already taking action to try and resolve that in some way, shape or form. But to the point that's been made about the quantity of fall-throughs and the inefficiency in the current process to such an extent that it now takes on average 5 months from me agreeing to buy your property to me completing and moving into that property, whereas if we go back 20 years it was 3 months on average. And obviously I'm talking about this from a PEXA perspective, which is an Australian business that was set up to address some of these issues in the Australian market, and now you're in a situation in the Australian market where it takes on average 30 days from me agreeing to buy the property to the point at which that we complete on the property. So I think there are multiple ways in which affordability can be measured, and therefore there's multiple ways in which affordability can be affected. So stamp duty is clearly a significant one. I think making the home buying process more efficient and more effective so that it happens sooner improves the productivity for all of the professional bodies, so the lenders and the conveyancers in that marketplace as well. I think they're in an opportunity where they can effectively...
Do you think if that's addressed, Joe, you'd see more supply in terms of the affordability of homes, and that would help improve?
One of my main contentions is I think people don't move house as often now as they used to. So it used to be said that you'd move house once every 7 years, buy and sell a house once every 7 years. Now we're north of 20 years, and one of the key reasons for that is because actually it's such a painful process. All the research shows that it takes when you say what are the most stressful things that you do in your life, purchasing or selling a property is always second on the list after divorce. Well, obviously often those 2 things come together anyway at the same time. But if you could make it less of a nightmare and get it back to the process that it was previously and make it much more swift, then it goes to the core of what I think a lot of the sort of so-called British dream is about home ownership, about the potential to actually own their own property. If they feel that they can do it, they would do it. Whereas at this moment in time, a lot of people, they might be thinking about downsizing, and they think about the process, they think about what their friends have told them about the process, they think about what they read in the media, to Beth's point, about the process, and they decide not to do it. So I think you would see if we could get back to that point where people were actually climbing the housing ladder, because as you climb the housing ladder, you vacate the property you bought previously, so you start off buying a first-time buyer property and you move up, it would increase the supply of second-hand properties into the market to augment the supply of new build properties that the government is rightly focused on as well. I think that would bring a benefit to the market as well.
I'll just come back in. I think, agree what Joe and Beth both said. I think from an agent point of view on the ground, it can be often difficult to know the financial situation of potential buyer. So if we talk about first-time buyers and those on lower incomes as well. So I think where, buyers sought independent financial advice, they understand their budget before they're viewing a property, and they understand the timing of their mortgage application, or have got an early mortgage in principle. These are, practical steps that almost, the best buyers or the knowledge buyers can help speed up the process, help themselves and get ahead of the game. It may sound simple, but it's fragmented across the country. But where those steps are in place, agents do see, buyers who are better along the process to, get a property that meets their financial situation, but also understand what they're buying from the outset.
And one of the challenges is that most mortgage lenders will give you a offer in principle that will last for 3 months, because the expectation always was 3 months will be sufficient time for you to complete your property purchase in. But as I've said, on average it's now 5 months. So therefore, in a significant number of cases, the mortgage offer will lapse before you actually get to the point of completion, and you'll have to go and renew it, which is really challenging for the individual as well as for the lender.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things that the government cites. They cite that impact on 1 in 3 transactions is costing around £400 million a year, so it's quite a significant amount as well. Beth, did you want to come in?
Well, it was only to say that the Home Buying and Selling Council is made up of participants, but also all of the representative and trade bodies, and we've been working on this for 7 years now. MHCLG just came out with the consultation on home buying and selling reform, which reflected a lot of the things that had come out from the Home Buying and Selling Council work. And we do know that where that work is deployed, where the solutions are deployed, so providing upfront information to identify the material information that would impact the average consumer, by ensuring that buyers, as Tim has said, have already had a financial review, then means that transactions go down to 5 to 7 weeks. And we're seeing that where it's been tested. And in fact, where pilot firms have been testing it, they're now business as usual because it works so well. But the difficulty that we have is that with chains of transactions, you can only go as fast as the slowest person. Yeah. And so unless we get some legislative commitment to have this across everybody, and that has to be enforced as well, then we're not going to be able to improve the whole of it in England.
Obviously, we've seen a massive increase in digital and property transactions in Australia over the last decade. I think the research is showing that it works on over 90% of property transactions, over 20,000 a week, big introductions. Just on that, Joe, could you tell us a bit more in terms of what that process is like, and is there anything we can learn here in the UK?
Yeah, 100%. And the reason that I came to join PEXA was because of the Australian experience, because of what the business had proved could be done in the Australian market. So PEXA is not a silver bullet that does everything that the Australian market does differently to the UK market, is the first sort of point to make. So there are some other things I would support Beth's call for material information as part of that, and they have reservation agreements over there as well. So there are other aspects that make a difference to the overall process. But one of the key things that PEXA, and there are other digital platforms as well as part of that sort of process, but one of the key things that PEXA effectively does is it creates a digital hub that sits at the heart of the transaction, that the consumer, the conveyancer and the lender on both sides can have sort of full access to. So everyone's looking at the same piece of information at the same point in time, that is integrated with, in Australia, the federal bank. Over here we're integrated with the Bank of England, obviously, and also with HMLR, and again in Australia with state registries, so that you get to a point in a transaction that you can effectively set the system up so that it will say, okay, as long as everyone has greenlit the process, we know the transaction can happen at a particular point in time. So you set it up and you say 10 o'clock on Friday the 9th of January, that transaction is going to happen. And effectively what it does is it manages the money movement, it nets the money movement between reserve accounts at the Bank of England, and at the same time it lodges the interest at land registry. So what it also does is it massively reduces the flow of money that goes through the system on a housing transaction sort of process, which massively reduces the potential for fraud and other sort of error that can potentially occur, which costs the industry vast sums of money every year over here.
Chris, did you want to come in?
I was just going to are there any barriers, or on the government side at least, to your system becoming as efficient in the UK as it is in Australia?
So we've focused very much in the UK on it being a market-driven activity. So we are focused very much in the conversations that we have with lenders. So the system works for 70% of cases currently in the UK. You could use the system for, provided the lender is tied up and using the platform. So there's 2 lenders that use the platform today, and recently we announced that NatWest will become the first of the big 6 lenders to start using the platform. So our strategy is very much around getting more and more lenders onto the platform, because then that makes it much more viable for the conveyancers to go on and use it, because people don't want to dual process in some way, sort of shape or form. What I think it would be really useful from a government perspective is a sense of direction. Because the market is very keen to look at the direction of travel and kind of say, okay, are we going down the process of digitisation as a route? Because what it effectively will enable people to do is to move away from the paper-based processes, which are kind of the way that we operate today, which are almost the last resort, if you were kind of sort of thinking about how you would kind of sort of manage this process. So effectively say we're going to go through a digital process going forward. I think that would be a very useful thing. I don't think there's any significant legislation required. There's been some changes at HMLR. So, for example, the introduction of acceptance of qualified electronic signature. That's important, because at the moment, and I would say I've bought and sold businesses which I can do using DocuSign, but I can't buy and sell a 2-bedroom flat in Scunthorpe. Using DocuSign. So, we're getting through that, and we're working really well with HMLR. So I think, it will get... What happened in Australia is that obviously each state was different, but it got to a certain point where the land registries went out to the market and said, we no longer wish to receive this the old-fashioned way, we want to receive it digitally. And different states took different approaches. So in Victoria, they were very, proactive, and they said, actually, when you get to 20% of completions happening this way, then we want to mandate that's the way to use it going forward. Whereas in Queensland, they said, well, you've got to get 80% before we're prepared to do that. So I think there will come a tipping point, and what will happen at that point, I think Land Registry will effectively drive that, because they'll be the people that will be impacted by this. Because at the moment, around about 25% of work that's submitted to Land Registry, they need to send back to the conveyancer for rework to be done on it.
Joe, just to be clear though, I think it's important to be clear, Chris, that PEXA just does the settlement. It's just the financial transaction. It's not the gathering of information up front. So yes, all of the stuff that Joe says makes a huge difference, but the real difference in Australia is the vendor disclosure element, so that the vendors have to have on the kitchen countertop all of the information relating to the property, including termite reports and things like that, for the consumer to review, so that they put in a binding offer. It's not a reservation agreement, it's a binding offer. They have a 6-day cooling off period during which they can identify if they've got the financing sorted, and then they set a completion date, agree a completion date, and that's where PEXA comes in to do all the digital execution of the documents and the disintermediation of assets, so passing the money and getting the land registration in return. And that has been, as he says, so effective that all the states are coming on board one by one. Was it Queensland that went on board in August last year? And
Tasmania and Northern Territory.
So
it
certainly works, but PEXA.
How are we going to get that cultural shift in terms of moving to a more digitalised system in the UK? What do you think the government would need to do?
We need a data standard that's agreed, a set data standard. The Open Property Data Association have created the Property Data Trust Framework. And that currently is being tested in a sandbox environment to enable anybody that wants to join in to digitise and transfer data. If you think that all of the stakeholders in the home moving process, all of those sectors need the same data, and we've done some work on this in the Digital Property Market Steering Group, where each sector had a working group to identify what data they needed and when. And then we looked at it and went, everybody needs the same data, but it's so much duplication. Mm-hmm. Once we've got it digitised, then that means that can be shared across all of the sectors at the right time in a much more efficient process. Now, to do that, we need it to be digitalised. So it's called FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable. And that will require a huge amount of work from government to digitise, for example, local authority data, to digitalise land registry data, to enable that to be shared. And we're just at the beginning of that. There's a pilot through DPMSG of 9 local authorities who are looking at highways and buildings regulations data. So it needs to be pushed forward, it needs to be supported to ensure that is delivered.
I think that's fair. What I would say is that I think that progress can be made irrespective of, you don't need to do all of that to get the full degree of return.
Okay.
I think, that is, utopian where we want to sort of get to, but at the same time, I don't think, we cannot make significant strides whilst we're doing that at the same time.
And we do need the quick wins, don't we? And the digital ID is the key one, because that reduces that fraud. And for example, the professional indemnity insurers will say that if we use digital ID and digital signatures, then they can see that the insurance premiums will reduce by 60%.
And very quick, I'm just
but
mindful of time.
very quickly, I think from an agent point of view, all roads start from the title. And that's essentially the land registry. And as Beth's alluded to, there is a local land search information project which started in 2018, but from March 2025 last year, we've only had 110 local authorities who fully signed up to that.
Okay.
So we're not even halfway. Some extra investment from the government to give that along, because ultimately, people held up the Nordic countries, and I think it's Finland or maybe Norway, where you can move in a matter of weeks. But what they did was they spent the time and investment to cleanse all their information. I know it's a smaller market, it's not a like-for-like comparable, but they did cleanse all their information. So that information around leasehold, restrictions, easements, all on the property, we've got to get it correct in the land registry first.
Lewis, over to you. Thank you.
So, if we abolish stamp duty, what do you think that would do to the housing market?
Wonderful things. Stamp duty, this is just a personal opinion, but I think it's a hugely regressive tax. I think clearly you need to have a property tax. If you look at somewhere like France, I believe they have an annualised tax in replacement of stamp duty. But stamp duty, to me, seems to be a massive barrier to activity in the marketplace, because what you're saying to somebody is you're going to have to put forward tens of thousands of pounds in some way, sort of shape or form, or that's going to be added to your mortgage, which therefore makes the property that you're able to buy, reduces the number of properties that you're potentially able to buy, because you're paying that at the point of transfer. It puts people off buying property. So I'm not an economist, and I'm not speaking on behalf of PEXA with this comment, to be clear. I'm just saying I've for a long time now I've felt that it's a hugely regressive tax, and there must be a better way. You're clearly not going to give up the revenue, you're going to have to get the revenue another way. But doing it through some annualised taxation model would seem to me a better suggestion.
There are exceptions for first-time buyers, but what there is not is exceptions for final sellers, for the downsizers, which does cause a huge problem with the bedroom blockers, like me, who, the kids have left, and do I want to sell up and then just throw away a load of money on stamp duty, or just stay where I am? And that's why that average home moving time has gone up to 19 years. It's because people now aren't downsizing, and they are bedroom blocking.
I think, Lewis, in an ideal world, we would say yes, get rid of stamp duty. We know from the holidays that we've had throughout the pandemic, I think May and August 2020, property selling 2 weeks faster. Back in 2008, 2009, transactions increased by 8%. So there's clearly an appetite for people when they see stamp duty removed to move, to look to the market, and ultimately, whilst there needs to be another conversation around where perhaps the government gets revenue from, there is a knock-on impact in the wider economy. On average, people spend minimum £10,000 when they move, in terms of the supply chain, professional services, basic furniture removal. So there is an economic benefit to having reduced or no stamp duty in the economy. I think realistically, we've said that lower rates across the board would maybe get the government some money and stimulate more activity, so the revenue that they could get in bulk sells at the top end of the market, they could maybe get over more transactions because the rate is lower for everyone. But I think there needs to be probably a better conversation around sort of more regular updates to stamp duty bands, so they're reflective of wage growth, house price growth. There's obviously geographical differences as well. So the higher starting purchase price is more favourable for people. And I think, as I say, we need to have more engagement. We don't regularly, as a government, review stamp duty. There's no sunset clause to say we'll do it every 5 years. It's ad hoc, it's at fiscal events, and it just creates uncertainty, and we're at the behest of different decisions almost on an annual basis.
Beth, you said there are some exemptions for first-time buyers.
There's
I think
49 exemptions across stamp duty, which is a nightmare for people to work through.
I think it's about, the threshold is about £250,000 across the country in terms of first-time buyers.
I think it's gone down to 300 million now.
In terms of the property...
300,000, sorry.
Yeah, 325.
Do you think that needs to be regionalised? Because the properties in my constituency, there won't be many below that, whereas if you go further north in the country, there will be more options for people to be able to get on the property ladder and not pay stamp duty. So do you think at the very least, the government should look at thresholds across the country and maybe regionalise those if it wasn't to abolish it?
I think if you want to stimulate people getting on the property ladder, absolutely. That has to be the thing that you want to do, because if you get people on the property ladder, then they have forever security. It means that if they fall on hard times, you're not going to be paying rent on, the government is not going to have to be paying their rents, just the interest on their mortgage, which is so much less. So yes, I think that makes total sense. I think that would be a really good idea to regionalise it.
Just on the abolition of stamp duty, there is a suggestion that while it might stimulate some transactions, it doesn't fundamentally transform it, in the sense that what you're doing is putting more money in the pockets of the same people who are buying the houses. It doesn't open it up to a wider range of people. How would you respond to that?
I mean, it might well happen in that way because it's a market activity in some way, sort of shape or form. I'm not convinced, however, that when people think about it, what they think about is the value of the property that they're acquiring. So let's say that they were buying a £300,000 house and they were paying, I don't know, £50,000 worth of stamp duty. I don't know if that's correct or not. Then the reality is, if they thought they were buying a £350,000 house, I think they would feel a lot more comfortable with that idea, rather than saying I'm buying a £300,000 house and I'm giving £50,000 to the government.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I'm keen to jump in here because we anticipated that stamp duty would come up. Really interested in your answers so far. Indulge me in a scenario, say that we had to have a policy that was revenue neutral, and the government position it was that you couldn't get rid of stamp duty because it would cost too much to the exchequer. If the proposition was then to replace stamp duty with an annual tax on all homes, which would obviously be smaller, but that would net out, interested in your reactions on what impact that would have on the housing market.
You'd have to balance that really carefully because, of course, that impacts affordability. Now, the FCA are coming out, hopefully, in the first half of this year with a consultation on the affordability reform because they feel it's gone a little bit too far now. So people who can prove that they can afford their rent should therefore be able to prove that they can afford to pay their mortgage, which will be less than their rent. So the difficulty is if you're then sticking on another payment that they're going to have to make on a monthly basis or an annual basis, then that will impact affordability. And of course, for first-time buyers, that's going to be key.
I mean, I think. But at the same, just quickly on that, if I can. But we were talking about downsizing, and I agree that that's a really important consideration. If you've got a difference between someone being presented with a stamp duty bill of £25,000 versus an incremental payment of £150 a month, that could be a material change and drive a really different behaviour.
Have those people who would be downsizing got that sort of money sloshing around in their pocket? Because they'll be on pensions and things like that. I suppose you could enable them to capitalise. Well, hopefully they will, won't they? Yeah. But then they've got to be the bank of mum and dad and facilitate their kids to get on the property.
Should they? That's a question for politicians.
Joe, Timothy, any other observations? I know we've covered it, but it is an important subject. No, I think the alternatives as well, because that's what you need to look at. I
would agree with Beth. I think, from my point of view, people will sit there and think to themselves, that a monthly payment is far more easier for them to consume, if that makes sense, rather than some astronomical sum of 25, 50,000, whatever that number would be, that they lose on a particular. And the point is, they lose that on the transaction. It's not simply part of their ongoing cost of owning a property.
Yeah, probably around is there from a consumer point of view an understanding of what is stamp duty and why it's paid? At least if council tax is a monthly charge, but at least to some extent there is some cynicism around local authorities, of course, but to some extent you can see what it pays for and what it does. So maybe that needs to form part of the conversation. But I think ultimately, let's have a review, let's have a consultation, let's have an open conversation with the industry rather than leaks through the media and speculation. I think that's the positive way forward.
One more question from me on transaction taxes. So there's a lot of data out there that say that a lot of people buying a home are simply not aware of all the additional costs, whether it's conveyancing fees, whatever they be. And the question for the panel is, what can the government do, both to increase transparency and understanding of the true cost of moving home, but also, where possible, to bear down on those costs as well?
I think, from my point of view, I would say that if you have a digital property transaction which is a lot simpler and is a lot more transparent, then people should get a lot more information out of that. And because of the impact that I see that the potential of a solution like PEXA has on the reduction in fraud and the reduction of intercept, then that takes out a significant proportion of cost base that exists within the market as well. So I think there's a cost to transact which is significant. Stamp duty aside, there's still a cost to transact which is significant. But then there's also the cost of the failure of the transactions. So as both Beth and Tim have said, 30+% of transactions in the UK do not complete. So I say we agree to buy. I'm going to buy a house, and then that simply doesn't happen. And on average, that impacts affected individuals by over £2,000. So effectively, people are going into a process. And this has happened to me as well in the past. You go into a process where you intend to buy a house. You end up coming out with absolutely nothing but a £2,000 bill.
And that's mainly the buyer in most cases.
Yes, it's predominantly the buyer that's going to be having those costs, because, most of the time there are certain items that you purchase up front, but a lot of the professionals don't get paid when a transaction is bought. So the estate agent doesn't get paid. The majority of conveyancers don't get paid. The lender gets no return on the money that they've effectively had to put aside and the processes that they've had to sort of go through. So that is a cost which is borne across the industry. So effectively, if we were able to take that 30% down, get it close to the 1%, obviously they get in Australia, it would be nice to get it, let's say you get it to 15%, then that is a fundamental productivity saving that the entire industry can effectively enjoy, and you would expect some of that to be passed on to the consumer.
Thank you. So the Digital Property Market Steering Group are creating a digital property information protocol, which will be an online website where consumers can go and see what they have to pay when, who does what when, and who to go to for advice. What should government do? They should fund the website. The MHCLG are chair of the Digital Property Market Steering Group, and yet we're struggling constantly to try and get these things delivered because we don't have any money. It's all done voluntarily. So some funding, that would be nice. But I think, as Joe says, we need to reduce the transaction times and the fall-through rates. That will have a huge impact. As I said earlier, £1,500 lost each time it goes through. The other thing we should do is pass the material information, the upfront information cost from currently the buyer to the seller. And we've done lots of surveys of home movers and even those who are selling say, yeah, I should be paying to provide the searches, to provide the condition report, to provide the title information and the property information, because I know I'm selling that house, whereas a buyer doesn't know if they can buy it until they've actually got that information.
Is that the norm internationally? We talked about Australia, but I'm interested in other examples. Is the pressure on this obligation on the supplier greater elsewhere?
Yeah, so certainly in Scotland we've got the home reports where that information is paid for and provided by the seller. In Norway and Denmark, a lot of Europe it's provided up front, and obviously Australia, vendor disclosure is provided up front.
I just have two points on maybe affordability. I think I'll just reiterate it's around education. So those points around understanding, getting independent financial advice, getting your mortgage in principle, and knowing your budget. But I think one thing they've done in New Zealand is create a first-time buyer decision tool. And actually, I'm not maybe worth having a look at. The UK, we're looking at the success of that, but certainly that kind of creates indicative costs of professional services and what you might pay in property tax in the round. So I think a tool like that, sat.gov.uk, which is a trusted brand website, might be helpful for people to understand costs going forward.
I think it's quite a complex matter, and conveyancers are obliged to and do provide a breakdown of what the consumer can expect to pay as part of that process. But often when do you get to appointing a conveyancer is quite late on in the process. So people go into the process right at the beginning of it based on information that they're getting from other parties, and then potentially the conveyancer then provides them with that information.
And also they don't have the information to be able to get a full quote, so they won't know that it's leasehold, they won't know that it's a Building Safety Act property and that conveyancer can't act on it. Or that there may be estate rent charges, and that's the other problem we've got, is the sheer complexity of title created through the leasehold issues that we're still trying to resolve, and we've got the leasehold.
We can spend all day on leasehold, trust me.
But that's why we need to invest in the land registry.
Yeah.
And the registers across the UK.
And common hold.
And common hold. Moving on to property agents.
Sure. As the Chair said, just moving on to a slightly different issue. Do you think the government should regulate property agents? And if they did, and they were required to be qualified, is there enough capacity to support that transformation?
I'm nodding because last time I was giving evidence to the Select Committee, this is exactly what we all of us said. Yes, we need regulation of property agents, not just estate agents selling, but also property managers managing blocks as well. Reason being is that there are so many out there that don't actually know that they're the law and that they're supposed to be providing material information, and without any enforcement, because national trading standards have the responsibility for enforcement but no resources, so they are going to put all of their resources into things that would impact public safety rather than worrying about people buying property. So we need to have regulation of property agents, and certainly as a regulated person, I'm regulated under the Council Licensed Conveyancers and the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives. I know that I absolutely follow whatever my regulator tells me to do, because otherwise there will be enforcement. They will either take away my practicing certificate so I can't earn any money, or they will fine the company that I work for. If we have that, if all we need is the media to start talking about agents getting fines or being asked to supply undertakings. If they're asked to do things properly and they're notified that they've got it wrong, if they know that the next step will be a fine, then that will get them moving into order. But at the moment we don't have a level playing field. So the brilliant ones that are part of Propertymark, for example, will be working really hard to follow the law, but then their competitors will be going in saying, oh, don't you worry about that, we'll get the property on the market immediately without any material information, we'll carry the can. And so they win the listing. Now, that's so unfair, but also it means that the transaction is more likely to fall through and will take far longer.
I'll let Timothy come in on the subject of actual regulation of agents, because obviously that's very much in his area. What I would say, I picked up on the word capacity there. I have a genuine concern about the capacity of the conveyancing market going forward, because we have seen 15% of conveyancers leave this marketplace in the last 2 years. I did a survey 3 years ago which said that 30% of conveyancers were intending to leave the market within the next 5 years. So I would say the stats that we've seen more recently evidence that the response that we got on the survey was accurate. And partly that is because the job of conveyancing has become far more complicated, far more time-consuming than they ever set out to do. So these are serious people that have professional qualifications in a subject that are regulated, that are choosing to leave the industry because it's, to be frank, a lot of the time the feedback is it's just simply not what they once expected it to be. And I think that we will get to a point over the course of the next few years, unless we change the way that we convey property in this country, where it doesn't matter how many new houses that you will build, the length of time to transact will just get longer and longer and longer, because we will have bottlenecks, because conveyancers will be finding the process incredibly difficult to manage. I don't know, Timothy, if you want to come back on
I think the simple answer, Will, is yes, and Propertymark's long held that position to drive up standards, level the playing field and bring more accountability to estate agency. I think, as Beth has alluded to, we need to have it across sales, lettings and block management to ensure we have that consumer protection, and obviously a statutory code of practice, and through reforms that standardise home buying and selling, then ultimately people are working to the same standard and the consumer has access to the same protections. In terms of capacity, well, we've seen membership growth year on year, and members need to be qualified in order to get into Propertymark membership. So they're doing that on a voluntary basis, and we've seen in Scotland where there's letting agent regulation, higher standards of satisfaction, professional competence when members have been surveyed. So we'll welcome the fact the government have looked at it. Hopefully there'll be further consultations and conversations on that, but it is a part of the puzzle for consumer protection and driving up standards and levelling the playing field, definitely.
Thank you. License.
Can I just ask a quick question first? It'd be good to quantify some of the things that we've been talking about. So do you have numbers, say if you were to buy an average property, £300,000, what the cost of that transaction is broken down by the biggest elements? Obviously on that property you wouldn't pay any stamp duty, so the rest of it, how much would that process cost you?
Well, if you were a seller, you'd be paying about 1% in estate agency fees. Would you agree, Tim?
1.23% including VAT.
Brilliant, and it should be more.
1.2. 1.2.
Very good. And then the conveyancing fees, it could be anywhere between sort of 800 and 1,500 on average. But if you add in then the complexity of the title, so if it's a leasehold property, if it's a managed freehold, if it's a state rent charge, if it's going to need a deed of variation, that just adds and adds and adds things onto it. So one of our members won't take on any work for less than £3,000 because to be able to provide a service and get people moved in 3 months, that's how much.
Which would be another 1%.
Sorry?
Which would be another 1%.
Yeah, so we say that probably another 1%. And then, of course, you've got the stamp duty on top of that as well, if you're buying onwards. So that
probably looking at somewhere around 2.5% plus stamp duty on top of that.
Is it around 3%, Tim, I thought? In total, overall, which compared to somewhere like America, where it's 10%, and other places like that, then...
Do we have a comparison of what the number would be in Australia?
I don't, but I can write to the committee and provide you with that information.
It'd just be good to, because obviously I'm asking because we talk a lot about increasing supply and the impact that would have on affordability. And that's a big, important focus of this government, but it'd be good to have the two numbers side by side. What could be achieved by increasing supply? What could be achieved by decreasing transaction costs in terms of affordability? Anyway, the question I was supposed to ask is that we've talked a lot about the simplicity of the process. Is there any more, Beth, that you think lenders could be doing to speed up the process of, or simplifying the process of?
Yeah, absolutely. They have a handbook which contains all of their instructions. They're digitising that at the moment, but they're now talking about charging conveyancers for accessing those handbooks. Unfortunately, conveyancers don't get paid by those lenders to act for them on those instructions. And I'm afraid, as Joe said, we're going to see more conveyancers leaving the market because of that, because they won't want to be paying to access something to receive instructions that they're not getting paid for, and that they are likely to be sued on if they get it wrong. Lenders also could be looking at supporting the affordability for first-time buyers better. There are 3 that I know of, so Skipton will enable their affordability to take into account whether they've been paying their rent successfully. Nationwide do a helping hand scheme, and Yorkshire Building Society will allow a £5,000 deposit. So there are ways that lenders are doing things, but it's not across the board. We're also looking at do you all remember we used to have interest-only mortgages back in the day, which maybe led a little bit too far, but an interest stroke repayment mortgage where it's part interest, part repayment, and being able to mix that up whilst your affordability changes with your lifestyle could help with that. So, once we get some of these products being attempted and tried and tested, and as I say, the FCA are looking at that reform and consulting on that. Then the wonderful thing about the lenders is they're very competitive. So once they see that someone's doing something that's winning all of the business, then they will get on with it as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, the lifetime ISA. The government has announced plans to replace the lifetime ISA. What would you like to see? What improvements would you like to see to the product?
I think the lifetime ISA works very well. My daughter used it for her purchase. It worked a treat. But we do hear that a lot of people put the money in but then decide not to buy a property, or they want to take money out, and then they lose out on that. So I think there was some proposal that should become more flexible so that people can receive a decent amount of return to encourage them to save up to buy a property. But if they do need to take the money out for some other life event, then they can do that without such a big loss, and maybe putting it along the same lines of your normal equity ISA, for example, so that they do still make a return on it, but without the grant from the government to, because they're not buying a property.
I think there's a lot of inefficiency that exists within the overall market, and lenders are not immune from that. So there's inefficiency that exists in the lending operations, and we talk to lenders a lot today about actually how, for example, that they report on the title interest that they effectively have to register at Land Registry as part of the process as well. So a lot of lenders will have, significant processes in place to effectively manage that, and that costs them, it costs the Land Registry, and it costs the overall industry quite a lot of money. And Land Registry alone recognise it costs them £19 million a year on their own. So imagine that factored out across the industry, it's fairly substantial. So my argument always is actually if there are ways that we can make this process more efficient, then that should have obviously impacts on the affordability of lending, and therefore that should have an impact on the affordability to consumers of effectively what they're buying, whether it be services they're buying from the lenders or whether it be services they're buying from the conveyancers.
Okay.
I think finally on the whole, the feedback we've had from property agents are that the products out there and the lifetime ISA are good. There's not been many negative feedback. I think what we have seen a trend from members in the last 12 months and beyond is because deposits are higher, particularly amongst first-time buyers, or the need for further deposits are higher, they've seen less first-time buyers buying doer-upper property because there's less money to go around. So that means that there's no almost renovation fund, no money to do up an empty property, or where first-time buyers have had to move to another area, support to relocate. So I think it doesn't directly answer your question about lifetime ISAs, but that is some feedback we've had consistently from agents across the country.
Is the cap, £450,000 cap on the lifetime ISA high enough?
I'd have thought so, but probably not.
Well, it's a particular problem for new builds, I'm guessing, which, in particular in the south of England, you're not going to get one for less than 450,000, even as a first-time buyer.
Yeah, I suppose what average.
Sorry, I thought you meant the money putting into the ISA at 450. So are you suggesting that they buy for cash?
No, the price of the house is capped at 450.
Got you.
Yeah. And that's without incurring the penalty, isn't it? So if you.
Yeah, probably best if I go back and come back to you on that one, if that's all right.
Thank you very much for coming before the panel select committee this morning. We had some really interesting ideas, and we'll definitely keep in touch with you as our inquiry progresses. Order. Order. Welcome to the second part of our inquiry this morning on affordability of home ownership. Can I ask our guests to just introduce themselves, please? I'll start with Paul.
Thank you. Paul Rickard, I'm Chief Executive of Pocket Living. We are a SME London-based developer and the only developer in the country that focuses on selling discounted full ownership homes. Prior to that, my background was housing association, including Clarion.
Hi, I'm Steve Collins, Chief Executive of Rentplus-UK. We are an affordable rent-to-buy housing product. We have a number of organisations or companies within the structure, one of which is a regulated housing association. I've been operational within the housing industry, both within public and private sector, for the last 30 years.
I'm David O'Leary, Executive Director at the Home Builders Federation. We are the principal trade body for home builders in England and Wales.
Thank you.
Lovely. Morning, gentlemen. Chris's last question to the previous panel was about and what more could lenders do. My question to you three is, what are you or your members doing to provide more affordable housing in this country? And what more could be done? Your products are really interesting products, I think, and the space for. So, should we start with Paul and work our way down the line?
Yep, happy to. What are we doing? We're building homes where we can, which is, as you all know, incredibly difficult at the moment. It goes back to the question in the previous session that you opened with, actually, around affordability. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons we're very happy to join these types of events is to try and shape that agenda so we can deliver the homes that we need. On the affordability piece, and it plays into what can lenders do, what can government do. I think affordability as a word can be misleading because it's not necessarily about affordability. It can be about accessibility and other challenges as well. And I'd break it down into four areas. One is deposits, and I know this committee spoke at length about the mortgage guarantee scheme in the previous session, which unfortunately is insufficiently taken up at the moment, with no major lender providing it on new build flats, which certainly for a London-based developer of affordable flats, that's a problem. There is no 95% mortgage available to our buyers. The second is the loan to income.
Paul, do you know what is the maximum value that they
typically 85%. For our homes, there is only one mortgage available right now at 90%, and the extra interest that you would pay on that is over 1% more than an 85% mortgage. So although it's available, it's not very attractive.
The affordability issue.
Yeah. Okay. So then you have the loan to income ratio. So as you know, that the banks are broadly capped as a whole at 15% of their mortgage book being at over 4.5. That is a challenge for our purchasers. They can afford to spend more than 4.5. If we look at the rental levels that they're paying, and this is London, they move into a pocket home and their outgoings are less than they were paying in the private rented sector for a much higher quality product. So that's where the confusion is between affordability. They can afford it. They've been paying it for 4 or 5 years, but they can't get the mortgage. And that also obviously fails to reflect the earnings potential of the first-time buyer. Typically, first-time buyers will be at the earliest stage of their earnings potential, and a 4.5 in 3 years' time will be very different to a 4.5 today. Then the last thing, of course, is sentiment. And I think this you can't quantify, it's a very difficult thing to solve, but actually when we speak to our buyers, the ones that progress and don't progress, sentiment carries as much weight as affordability.
And Steve?
Okay, so Rentplus-UK is a unique product. We predominantly deliver homes within the Section 106 affordable housing market. What we do is we address the principal barriers that people face in accessing home ownership products. So that's principally the deposit, mortgage eligibility, and level of earnings over time. The product is designed to transition people into home ownership over a very structured time frame. So we offer 4 purchase points, year 5, 10, 15 and 20. We work with tenants during that period of time to ensure that they are mortgage ready, that they are in a position where they've influenced their own earning potential, so they've done learning, training, development, etc., to get them into the best possible situation in terms of their earning potential. And we help them with any perceived bad debts. You can move into a Rentplus product without a single penny, so there's no deposit requirements at all. And then when you choose to purchase, we eradicate the deposit barrier. We provide a 10% cash deposit, which is acceptable by the national mortgage market in the main. And from our own experience, what we found is that more than just over 70% of our tenants have bought their home at a time that was originally planned when they first moved in. So the tenants know at the very first day that they move into that property when their proposed purchase point is, and that really drives their aspiration to learn, develop and achieve that ambition of owning their own home.
And there's no upfront cost?
No upfront cost in that at all. And of course, from a taxation perspective, it's really good value for money for the public purse. It's all funded through institutional investment funds. There is no grant or subsidy that goes into our properties at all, other than the acquisition through the Section 106.
All right, but both of those statements can't be true then. If you get money from 106, that is.
But it's not cash from 106. It's effectively a discount. So the developer effectively pays for that, not the tax system.
And we've seen a lack of take-up of Section 106 properties, particularly from registered providers. Has that given you more market share? Are you growing because of the lack of 106 take-up?
Yeah, we certainly do have a significantly larger proportion of opportunities that have arisen during 25 and now into 2026.
And David from sector-wide?
Yeah, sector-wise, as Paul says, our members are building homes where they possibly can. On the sort of strictly affordable housing perspective, about 50% of the country's affordable homes are built through private sector cross-subsidy through Section 106 over the last sort of 5 or 10 years. But at the moment, we're massively constrained on two grounds, really. Viability, and I think Zoopla published a really good report a couple of months back that showed that in about 48% of the country is constrained by viability. It's either marginal viability or it's not viable to build homes in those parts of the country. Largely speaking, the rest of the country is then constrained on affordability grounds. And as Paul said, we talk about affordability in very general terms, and it's kind of assumed that we know what we're talking about. But for new build especially, we are constrained by the lender's perspective of new build. And effectively, since Help to Buy closed a few years ago, what lenders are doing is incentivising first-time buyers into the existing market, the doer-upper type properties that we've heard a bit about this morning, and that's where lenders are, through setting loan-to values where they are, especially on new build flats, as Paul has said. That's where we've got the challenge, and so you've got this twin problem of affordability and viability. So the planning reforms that we've seen over the last couple of years have been really positive, but we're still constrained by the pure economics of not being able to build homes.
I want to come on to Help to Buy and the potential other schemes in a second set of questions in a bit. But
I thought it might be helpful to expand just on the product that Pocket offers as well.
And could you cover the demographics that you target as well, and then Steve, I'll come to you for that same question.
Absolutely. So when Pocket was founded 20 years ago, the demographic we refer to as the city maker. So these are the people that London relies on. Without them, there is no city, and yet they can't afford to buy in the city that would not exist without them. So that was at the heart, and still is at the heart of what Pocket is. You can refer to those as key workers, especially with the sort of the larger ONS definition that we have today. And 40% of our buyers identify as public workers. If you were to take the ONS definition, it would probably be in excess of half. The average age is now 37. That's up from 32 in 2021. Average earnings over the same period of our buyers have increased from just below 40 to just below 50. And those are people with deposits of, it was 58,000 and that's now up to 85,000. Now that is against a London average, of course, of 150,000 first-time buyer deposit and an average value property of over £500,000. The pocket product, our current stock averages 269,000 with an entry point at 200,000. So it is arguably the most affordable full home ownership product in London.
One bed or two?
Sorry?
Is that a one bed?
That's a one bed. So our product is solely one bed. It's 38 square metres, compact, well-designed homes that are sold at a 20% discount to market. They're only sold to qualifying individuals, which is somebody that earns below the MES income threshold, does not already own a property, and lives or works in the borough.
And Steve?
We have a national portfolio. We predominantly focus on key worker housing, family accommodation. So we have a mix of one bed through to 4-bedroomed houses and apartments from Plymouth through to Northumberland.
Yeah, I had a look on your website before the meeting. I see you've got some in my local authority area. I don't think I need to declare an interest in that, but it was just interesting.
Unless you're buying one, Lee.
Well, quite, yeah. They didn't have any for sale. And actually, your upcoming list on your website is quite short, isn't it? I mean, there's about 12 properties, I think, on there.
That's right, yes. It's because what we're doing is we're currently going through a fundraising exercise, so more institutional investment funds will come through. That list will grow significantly over the next 6 months.
So we heard about home buyers and the complex set of documents needed to complete a purchase. Do you think that consumers have enough information to access affordable products like yourselves? And from a federation point of view, do you think that people have enough knowledge about affordable housing products and the help that's out there?
It's a bit of a frustration, actually. There was a government website that detailed all of at least the public supported schemes that were in operation, which I think was closed down quite quietly a year or so ago, maybe less. And that was a really good one-stop shop for, at the time there was Help to Buy, but there are other things like shared ownership. I do think there is a lack of information out there. And, events like this, but we could do more, I think, as an industry to help publicise that. It's also been a very difficult period over the last decade or so because we still get inquiries at HBF about starter homes, and they're obviously long gone. First homes slightly hanging by a thread still prominent in some areas but not in others. So there is this sort of slightly disjointed approach that we've seen grow out of the last 5 or 10 years.
I think it's quite interesting, even if people talk about council housing, and it's not, it's a social landlord, and actually the terminology in housing is just being built upon layer upon layer upon layer, and people refer to lots of different products, or the same product with lots of different names attached to it. So, and then... any other comments from Steve?
Sorry, I was just going to say that in terms of there is a massive information void, I think. Most information on the internet covers government-supported schemes, of which Rentplus is one. But of course, there are a multitude of options available to people, both in the private market as well as what I would consider to be the public market, which is the affordable housing element. And what you really need to do, and it was interesting in the session before you were talking about, I made a note of it, an affordability decision tool in New Zealand. I think that would be a really good way of enabling people to seek what housing options are available to them based on their own affordability criteria. Whether that's a rented property or a purchased property or a transitional product.
I'll add that I agree. No, there isn't enough information. We spend a lot of time running our own first-time buyer seminars to help educate people, especially when you're coming to it as a first-time buyer. Where do you start? Yeah. You might be fortunate that you've got parents that can take you through the process, but most people actually don't go down that route. And we end up, it's interesting what you just say, Lee, about the layering and layering and layering. That's also a barrier to institutional investment within housing. We speak to European institutional funders and they say, look, we'd love to invest in affordable housing in the UK, but it's just too complex. We don't understand it. So if you've got people at senior levels of institutional partners responsible for $10 billion, if they can't understand it, how is the average person supposed to? And on the flip side, there's the irony that despite it being very complex and layered, there's also still not any innovation within the home ownership space. In the 40 years that shared ownership has been running as a programme, Pocket, as far as I'm aware, is the only new innovation in home ownership. So we've actually got both problems.
And I'll move on to question 8, if I may. So what supports the government offering to boost provision of affordable housing, and what more can it do? Which one of you wants to go first?
I think it's really it's a very interesting question and could lead to a lengthy answer, which I'll do my best not to go down. I think there are a number of things that the government can do, keeping it broad, stabilise the market in some way, shape or form. So continuous change around policy, planning reform, renters reform. It is all seen in the market. It really is tinkering around the edges of policy, but some of those decisions have profound impacts on how the market sees it. So from an institutional investment perspective, securitisation of assets, mortgagee in possession clauses, standardising those types of securities would attract a huge amount of investment into affordable housing, which runs into Paul's comment previously. But I also think that providing a level of flexibility about type and tenures that are deliverable in local areas is really, really important. We tend to focus, or local authorities focus, government policy focuses on social rent, shared ownership, and completely misses out any statements about anything that meets affordability need or criteria that sits somewhere in the middle. And sadly, that is a growing part of our society today. There are more and more and more working households that cannot get on the ladder for one reason or another, but there are a multitude of products available in the market that will enable you to meet the needs of those people, yet there is no policy statements or policy reform that facilitates that innovation, that delivery, and I think that's a fundamental part of what is missing in government policy right now.
You talked about local government there as well.
Yes.
So is there more that local government could do working, with your sector, with your type of products?
100%. So we work with local authorities all over the country. At the moment, we require a deed of variation to a Section 106 generally to deliver it, to ensure that you've got the appropriate controls around disposals, deposit management, all of that sort of thing, which is designed to protect the tenants as they move into home ownership. Each one of those discussions with the local authority is generally bespoke, and it doesn't need to be. It's a series of model clauses that can be inserted into a local plan to say this is permissible. Yet local authorities don't do that, and they don't do it because they fear innovation. There is no policy directive that talks about them engaging with innovation necessarily. And whenever I speak to local authorities, as I say, on a regular basis, and their priority is seen as social rents. So it's particularly through the Section 106, it's a social rent priority, which is obviously meeting housing need for the most vulnerable and in need in society, which is absolutely right. But what I will say is that the longer we ignore the lower and middle income households, the very people that deliver our local services, our nurses, our policemen, our doctors and so on, in terms of them being able to access home ownership products within those local areas, we're going to end up with societies where those people will not want to move into those sectors anymore because they're not able to sustain a reasonable standard of living or meet their housing aspiration.
Paul, did you want to add anything onto that? And I've got one more question then for David.
Yes, please. I just agree with everything that Steve said. And our own research has said that 52% of key workers in London are talking about shifting profession because they can't afford housing in London. And we've already got the worst shortage of nursing of anywhere in the country. We could talk for 8 hours about on this question, so I'll say 4 points if I may. The first is tweak the mortgage guarantee scheme so that it's attractive to the lenders. So make it commercially neutral at best, and then strongly encourage the rollout of that to new build flats and houses. Then you help solve the deposit issue, acknowledging that the banks are now offering more higher leveraged products. We know they can come and go, and they're inconsistent. Secondly, abolish the 4.5 income multiple for first-time buyers and let regulated UK banks use their own credit systems. They're very good at what they do. And the current system doesn't support the characteristics of first-time buyers in that space. Thirdly, and this links to a question that came up earlier, recognise and accept it's okay to have a distinction between London and the rest of the country. The values are significantly different. We're not talking about different treatment, we're not talking about different policies, but we're talking about different levels. So you asked the question about the £450,000 cap on licenses and the 300k cap on stamp duty. Having a differentiation between London and elsewhere would make sense. Link it to average values across the country. And that precedent exists where Help to Buy was differentiated, and other policies have done that as well. The last thing I'll say is a recognition and more level playing field for intermediate housing products and innovative products like Rentplus and Pocket. We are still in a bit of a mentality that's 30, 40, 50 years old, where we say, well, for those in society that need it, we have social housing. For those that can afford it, we have private housing. And that used to be the case. And when my grandparents were growing up, that absolutely was the case. It's not the case today. There's a huge gap between those two markets that either is not acknowledged because people say we need and want social housing, nothing wrong with that. And as a result, you don't get a level playing field. So, for example, SIL charges on intermediate. We pay SIL when shared ownership doesn't. And yet our homes are more affordable and less profitable. There are 3 different definitions of affordable housing, and that's why we benefited from the first phase of Help to Buy, not the second one. There's no consistency, and there's nothing that supports and recognises the importance of intermediate housing for working people.
Can I just add just 2 very quick things on that one, just because I mean, on the Section 106 side of things, there are 2 big things that we'd like to see the government do. One is to address the problems with the registered providers and not taking Section 106 units. We could talk.
Are you finding that increasing a lot with the LPs?
Probably stabilised, but not improving.
Okay.
Would be how we would categorise that. That's been a long-standing issue. We think there's a reasonably simple solution to direct in the short term local authorities and RPs to be a bit more flexible. The other thing, which is a bit more fundamental and a bit more long term, I think, is that over several years we've chipped away at affordable housing in terms of the priority that it's given in the overall envelope of developer contributions. So if you assume that each development has a certain amount of viability and developer contributions can provide, whatever the community wants or needs, central government is increasingly taking a much bigger part of that cake than it used to. So things like BNG, the Building Safety Levy will come in this year now. That's an extra £3,000 that central government will take for every new build home that could be provided for affordable housing will be going straight to central government. Landfill tax, the same. What we've seen increasingly is different government departments over a decade. It's not more any thing about this government in particular, but over the last decade we have increasingly seen different government departments taking more and more of the viability out of development, and all of that ultimately the first thing that gets squeezed is affordable housing. We are seeing Section 106 numbers in terms of overall units falling at the moment.
You said about being a bit, I know you're here to represent builders, but basically you're saying registered providers should be more flexible and take a product that they're not happy to take.
No, not that they're not happy to take.
But they're not happy to take it. That's why they're not taking it.
Yeah, well,
I mean, the retrofit costs and the EPC ratings and the gas boilers, are part of why the 106s are sat on the shelves for RPs.
Yeah, and in that instance, we're all victims really of the sort of inaction that we've seen in terms of government policy, because if we put in place the Future Home Standard, then everyone would be working to the same standards. But at the moment, you've got, or in recent times, you've seen RPs particularly saying we want the Future Home Standard. We still don't know what the Future Home Standard is, but people are making assumptions about that and asking for well beyond current building regulations and current standards.
And Andrew quickly. Then,
forgive me, I've got to go in a minute, but I want to inject some optimism and perhaps issue a challenge. First of all, a report I was reading just a few weeks ago on the earnings ratio is now 5.9, earning to house price. That's the lowest it's been for 10 years. Obviously, we had the 6th interest rate cut since this government took office just before Christmas. I'd like to think it's recognised, and that there are parts of the market looking to 2026 and thinking this is going to make a material difference. Any comments on that? Welcome. But more specifically, the Affordable Homes Programme that this government has committed to of £39 billion is government subsidy. It was 60% more generous than what the one that the previous government offered. That will and should be making a very material difference over the next 5 years on all products. The government has specified that it wants a majority of those homes to be for social rent as per the conversation, but we're talking about low and intermediate products. That should surely create an opportunity, Steve, for your product, but also others in that range as well. And I'm really interested in your reflections on that and what you are seeking to do to be part of those conversations over the next few years.
Can I come in first on that one? I think so. The announcements, you're right, huge numbers, and fantastic, and more excited by the National Housing Bank actually, and the increased flexibilities that will be there with Homes England, and including the mandate to help SME developers, because let's be clear, SME developers are on the road to extinction. There is no question about that whatsoever, and it needs to be a serious concern. The challenge with the affordable housing element of it, the grant element, is again, it doesn't encourage innovation. It can only be applied to 4 core products, being your social rent, your affordable housing, rent to buy, and now I forget the 4th one, I'm on the spot. But the point is, it can't be used anywhere else. So when we're trying to work with government, MHCLG, local authorities, to say, let's do a new housing product, for example, a subsidised key worker product would be fantastic. There's no flexibility to offer grant against that. So you've got this dichotomy where you've got National Housing Bank, brilliant, unleashed help, and then the affordable housing saying, well, yes, we've got lots of money, but number one, we can only deploy it in these 4 categories. Number 2, if you look at the numbers, 60% of it is allocated to social rent. The numbers that we want to deliver, that's £130,000 grant per home. That's not touching the sides right now. So there's going to need to be more flexibility within it. So starting point, 39 billion, brilliant. But make sure Homes England has the flexibility to do more with it than is currently suggested.
Just as a point, the affordable housing grant is considered only applicable to non-Section 106 units. So it should be to enable the creation of additionality, not ones that are being delivered through the planning subsidy and planning requirements as part of the Section 106. So in that, what you've got is an affordable housing market that has retrenched from investment, so they're not purchasing Section 106 for various different reasons. And then you've got innovation like Rentplus and other products that want to purchase or acquire those Section 106 units, but local policy or national policy isn't necessarily supportive enough to enable that to happen, so that you can then work in partnership with other providers or our own housing provider to deliver the additionality and utilise the grant. So actually what you end up doing is you get the Section 106 being delivered effectively for nothing as part of that development cost, but then you can acquire a number of built units on that development as additionality. So you're increasing the proportion of affordable housing across the development. And I think having some clarity around how that can be delivered would really help local authorities, their planning departments to understand it. I've worked in situations where a local authority has actively bid against us to deliver their own Section 106 homes, which seems to be a bit ludicrous. Yeah. So that's actually costing the state. You know, why not utilise that? You know, recycled capital grant funding in non-Section 106 units to create additionality and let other players in the market that want to bring in institutional investment funds to deliver the Section 106. So that the rules of engagement in delivering 106 and additionality just don't seem to be consistently employed across the country.
Yep.
And we do see that play out in the whole discussion about RPs not taking Section 106 units, because in some instances, particularly in southern England, RPs may not want the Section 106 units on a site, but they may be willing to pay near open market price to a developer to buy pretty much the same homes, but where they can use government grant and create additionality. So you've got this weird position where there is existing subsidy in a set of homes on one part of the site, but the RPs want a different one so they can access a government subsidy directly. And just on the 39 billion, I think, we're really positive, and all of the other reforms that are happening at the moment in the social space that seem to be putting the RPs on a more firm footing. The 39 billion is particularly backloaded, so in the next 5 years, it looks like it's probably a sort of decrease or flatlining, probably. So, it's going to be good in years 5 to 10, I think. That's where we'll start to see the benefits.
Lewis, very quickly.
But David, some of that problem is because the 106 homes are 1 and 2 bedrooms. When local authorities are crying out for 3 bedrooms, it's developers not building the appropriate home that the local authority or the social landlord wants.
Yes, well, absolutely. And this is where we've had sort of many discussions with governments over the last few years about the disjointed nature of this, because a developer will agree with the local authority the package of Section 106, and the local authority rightly will say, well, our need here is 1 and 2 bed homes, so we want mostly 1 and 2 bed homes as part of the Section 106. The RPs may not want those homes, so you've just got this weird situation.
I don't think that's a true reflection. I think most local authorities will be asking for 3-bedroom family homes, and the developer will build 1 and 2 bed flats where there's not as much need for in the local authority. That's certainly my experience.
Sorry, if I can interject here. It's certainly not my experience. It's a consequence of the planning decision and the schedule of affordable homes that's produced as part of the Section 106 agreement. That's mutually agreed between the developer and the local authority. At that time, it just happens to be, and I think from a developer's perspective, it's more economical for them to build the smaller homes, and the local authority are accepting that as part of the Section 106 agreement. But I do take your point that in most local authorities, there are larger homes that are required. The default position and the challenge is always about housing needs survey. And while I'm on about housing needs survey, local authorities ask, how many homes do I need here of this particular size type? Okay. What they don't ask is what is required in terms of to enable people to access those homes, and affordability, and so on and so forth. So I do think that there is a big challenge about how Section 106 is designed or is delivering affordable housing types and tenures without actually it being a true reflection of what people really aspire to have.
My colleague Sean's going to come on to that in terms of... Chris, did you want to come in really quick? No? Okay.
A few questions, if I may. The government has announced a raft of planning reforms. They've said an ambitious 1.5 million homes they want to build by the end of the Parliament. Has that already started to help first-time buyers and the affordability? If it hasn't already started to help, do you think it will help?
No, I think it's too early to see any discernible sign of that. Long term, it will help, undoubtedly, but as I mentioned at the start, we're constrained by affordability and viability. So you can have a really fantastic, shiny new planning system, but if the economics of building the homes still don't stack up, then they won't be built unless the state comes along and puts a hell of a lot of money into it.
I sort of almost agree with what David is saying, but the additional part is that and I mentioned it earlier, continuous reform, planning, renters' rights is breeding uncertainty, and therefore as a consequence I'm certainly seeing that there are less opportunities coming forward for institutional investments. Affordable housing grant only enables a small proportion of that unit to be purchased. The rest of it is through private investment, and the level of private investment in UK PLC seems to be reducing at the moment as a consequence of uncertainty around the planning system, renters reforms and various other things that are going on. I think that's probably about all I can say.
Chris,
I think.
Sorry, just to come back to David a second, because we talk about viability. What we really mean by that is you can't build a house for the cost you can sell a house for, right? And often the answer we get from industry is, so can the government give us loads of money, please? Or subsidise free help to buy it, fine. The government is rightly hesitant towards doing that. But should we not be focusing far more on the other side of the equation, which is it costs us significantly more to build a home in the UK than it does in, for example, France or Germany? Why is that the case? And what can we be doing? The industry, to be honest, and this isn't, I don't think that, I'm not blaming house builders for this, but the industry has not got any more efficient at building a home in recent decades. Why is that? And what can government be doing in order to bring down the cost of building a new home so that it is then affordable to do so, and therefore affordable to purchase for your average person?
I mean, we're in the process of trying to establish exactly what the additional cost of building a home looks like over the last 5 or 10 years, 5 years really. It's in excess of £100,000 per plot on average of additional cost. A large part of that comes down to build cost inflation, so it's products and materials and wages. That's to be understood, and that's something that we ride the cycle of and understand and recognise. But a significant part is additional taxes, levies, policy costs that have been introduced by successive governments, because there has been a view, I think, that in inverted commas, the land value will absorb these costs. So I think the view has been consistently that landowners will pay for this. We've reached a breaking point in that equation where there is no more viable land in certain parts of the country. So we can do more to, and this is happening across the industry. Developers are opening factories and trying to standardise that process even more. You then run into design issues with local authorities who want something very bespoke and specific in different local authority areas. So that's a challenge. But fundamentally, we've had new taxes introduced year on year on year, and new policy costs, and that all needs to be absorbed some way, and they can't be at the moment.
So just on that, so on that one, what's the biggest of the taxes? What's of that cost of building a new home? What's the biggest of the new taxes and costs that the government
in terms of the current and sort of soon forthcoming ones? Probably, actually, the Future Home Standard represents a big number, but I think that's one that the industry is happy to, work with, because it's fundamentally improving the product that they're building as well, and providing something for consumers, for customers. Things like the building safety levy are pretty egregious, unnecessary, and unfair, and not needed.
After we've had some of the stuff that we've had, obviously not with some of your members, but I think it's right that we do have that high quality, so we don't ever see the UK facing a situation where 72 people innocently lose their lives.
Absolutely, yeah. But the building safety levy is kind of completely, we've since what happened at Grenfell and the changes that have happened in terms of reforms to building regulations. Completely agree. And the industry, our members, have collectively contributed about £7 billion to, go back and remediate and provide support for government funds through the residential property developer tax, things like that. The building safety levy, though, is completely unnecessary. There's still £2.5 billion sat in the building safety fund, not touched. And now the government is going to levy another £3.5 billion on the industry at a time when there just isn't the viability to do it.
Can I come in as a developer to answer that question?
Can I just add one more to it? One of the to Dave Davenport, my last one. One of the things they've done in Canada in order to support the standardisation and therefore hopefully improve efficiency in the market is to sign off nationally on a set of, I think, 50 properties that would automatically, it would help through the planning permission process, etc. Do you think that's something, I think for a national architecture competition, and they're all quite beautiful properties as well, do you think that's the kind of something that we should look at doing in the UK?
So I think so to an extent. Yeah, design codes are helpful and there's evidence to show they're helpful. If we look at the example in Croydon some time ago now.
It's a national design standards effectively.
Yeah, that's right. But that's just an expansion of a similar principle. You're moving towards a presumption in favour of development if you hit certain criteria, which is not a huge step from some of the things government's bringing in anyway, through brownfield passports, through the new station consents. But if I can bring it back to your original question, Chris, around the costs. Because you can break down the cost of development quite simply. You've got your land, you've got your building, you've got the selling, and you've got the profit. And you can look at each of those. And the proposals coming through around the planning phase, I think, will be really helpful, but it takes time. Development is a 4 or 5 year cycle. So we're not seeing an impact on first-time buyers there. We are starting to see an impact on developers' expectations, which is the very first stage in all of this. And if you look at strat land people, so people that are just go out, buy the land, or enter into options to get planning consent, that's really busy because they're the lead indicator and they're saying, okay, it is going to come. But if we look at the actual cost of building it, the labour, materials and so on, the two issues I see there are the validation requirements, so everything that we have to submit to get a planning consent. To get a planning consent just cost us £1.5 million to even get to a planning committee. That's £1.5 million at risk that we've got to. As an SME, if that goes wrong, you're out of business. You just can't sustain that. And that's in part because we had to submit 67 different documents. You've got schemes within London that are 4 stories requiring an aviation study. Now, the MPPF published just before Christmas is helpful and starts to limit those validation requirements, so we really welcome that. And we hope that will go further as well and have a reduced list for small and medium sites with a separate London distinction. And as part of rationalising that validation list, it also speaks to the theory of everythingism, where development, as David had said, because it will get absorbed into the land value, can solve all policy challenges. It can fix the environment, it can fix labour, it can fix everything because developers are rich and they can absorb it and it'll work its way through the system. And that mindset is changing, but needs to change much more quickly. Development is not treated the same way as any other sector in the country, where there is a cap on our profits, we're mandated to sell some of our product at cost or below, and we're mandated to not let the consumer decide what we build, but rather some arbitrary body.
Can I just come back on what sort of we started to talk about, is government policy changing things? I want to sort of reverse that into what the Competition and Markets Authority said recently, which is they feel private developers are deliberately building slower than they could do to ensure that prices stay as high as they can in a local area. That's an example that the Competition and Markets Authority have found. I think I'm aware of that being true in Woking, where clearly they've tried to work out the market of how many we can sell at a reasonable price, and that's the schedule we'll build, often 3 years where you could get it done a lot quicker. Is that your experience? Is this quite standard practice for everyone on the panel, but particularly David?
Well, I mean, ultimately, developers, like any other industry, need to be guided by the market, and there is also a level of which building more quickly can compromise quality, and we've seen that in the past. We don't think that can happen again now because of the provisions that are in place around New Homes Quality Board and New Homes Quality Code and that kind of thing. But ultimately, the developers need to build to the market, and at the moment you look at the market. This is where we talk about affordability, and we get into all these sort of related concepts. Effective demand. So, is there effective demand for a product at the market, the prevailing market value, and that will determine A, whether you can build at all, and B, how quickly you can build them.
And there's an important distinction here between the volume providers and the SMEs. I can't afford to slow down, and nor can any other small or medium developer, so it's not happening there. We need to build the homes, we need to sell them, we need to get the money out. Volume guys, as David said, they need to manage their workflow. So I'll speak to colleagues at much larger organisations. And part of it is sales absorption rates. There's no point building something you can't sell. But the other point is also labour preservation. They want to keep their labour force engaged, which means sort of spreading them around a little bit more or slowing things down, because they don't want to put those people out of business.
That's going to reduce your prices, won't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, also you can run into a problem where, especially if you don't have a pipeline of consented sites, you can run into a problem of all of the subcontractors finish a site and then they've got nothing to do, and then retaining. So, I mean, it's the retention of workforce that's part of the problem.
Lewis, very quickly.
So, David, let me just pick up on something you said. You said you can't go any quicker because it's going to affect the quality of the development. So you're telling me, when I drive past developments in my site where it's basically come to a standstill, they built half and it comes to a standstill, they need to completely pack up and stop for a couple of months to make sure the next half of the development, the quality is going to be good?
No.
That's what you said. You said
no, that's not what I said.
Because the quality is going to be affected.
No, I mean, if you absolutely ran it to as more quickly than the development can handle, and you end up with needing to take on different labour sources that you may not be familiar with your product, it's the same as any other industry in that sense. I'm talking more about at the extreme end of, if you're building as quickly as you can you build even faster? That's when you run into challenges around sales and quality and customer satisfaction. And the industry at the moment has the highest level of customer satisfaction that we've ever seen in the survey that we've been running for more than 20 years. So we've managed that very well, and we don't want to put that at risk. We wouldn't want to put that at risk. So no, it's not. It's absolutely not saying that sites come to a standstill. That's not what we see. Ultimately, as Paul says, any developer of any size will want to build as quickly as they can and complete the site as quickly as they can. There are massive on costs and fixed costs with running a development site. And if you can build the homes, complete the homes, and complete the site and reinvest, then
we've just heard
that's what you want to do.
That's not true. We've just heard that that's not true.
I don't think that the Competition and Markets Authority, my reading of what the Competition and Markets Authority said was more that the lack of certainty in the planning system leads to developers needing to manage their sites and their pipelines, which ultimately leads to sort of conversations about the speed of build.
There's thousands of unbuilt planning permissions, but
no, well, there aren't as many as some campaign organisations claim, because many of those are double counted.
We can look at what the CMA outlined. Sean.
11,000 unbuilt in my local authority that have got planning permission, by the way, just to add. But my questions are more sort of generally, but it underpins a lot of what we've been talking about, the issues in London, the gaps between sort of, it was 7 years, people are moving out, 20, issues with downsizing, and what Lewis has talked about in his local authority, and the for free beds when you're only building 1 and 2 for Section 106s, and it's about whether, and it's the answer to me seems pretty obvious. Are we building the right homes in the right places in terms of size, tenure, and if not, what can government, what can industry do about it? Open up.
I don't know if you I mean, ultimately, again, this comes down to the economics of what can be built and what can be sold as well. Previous session of this committee, I know that the lenders representatives had a view that we need to build more 1 and 2 bed apartments. The irony of that is that lenders typically don't want to lend on 1 and 2 bed apartments, so developers are part of an ecosystem of the market, and if there isn't a effective demand for those products with affordable mortgages, then they're more difficult to build. So what we've seen over the past decade again is that...
Just a quick question. What's your understanding as to why lenders won't provide products for those size flat, 1 2 bedroom flats? Simple profit?
You'd need to ask the lenders there, but we know, over many years.
Did you say it comes under the new build premium?
This is one of the frustrations that we have, because Help to Buy was introduced in 2013, and that was intended, I think, to allow lenders, very few lenders in the overall scheme of things lend on new build at all. It was intended to bring lenders into the market, give them a bit of a book of new build properties to see how they perform. My understanding is they've performed very well. More and more lenders came into that space because there was a government subsidy to support them to do so. When Help to Buy ended, they sort of vacated that space, and the higher LTV loans for especially apartments, but even on new build houses, sort of were gone as well with them. And that's the frustration, because the whole point of that was that I certainly talked to definitely to people in government at the time who said, when Help to Buy goes, the lenders will all sort of stick around at 95%. That didn't happen. It was complicated because it happened during, in the aftermath of the pandemic and rates were rising. It was a challenging time, but that support wasn't there across the entire market. Some lenders have stuck around, but not all of them.
Any further comments?
Sorry, I was going to just respond very briefly. Building the right houses in the right locations, what exactly does that mean? And again, my experience of working across local authorities, there are house types, 1 bedroom flats, 2 bedroom flats, through to 5 bedroom homes that are needed in every single local authority area across the country. They're all houses of need. The question is about prioritisation, and that's more of a question around type and tenure. So how many of this type of house are for affordable? How many of this type of a market? How many of this are for intermediate products? And it goes back to my previous question. When you look at housing needs surveys, it talks about the types of houses that are needed in that particular local authority area, but not the tenure of them, how they enter the market, how they're marketed to meet the needs of that particular local population. And I think that is a question that needs to be addressed. In terms of what the government...
Do you think that the government should address that in their housing strategy as well, with the overall 1.5 million homes?
I do, 100%, and I do, of course. Again, this is not a political statement by any stretch of the imagination, because it's been many governments over many, many decades seem to avoid the subject of, asking local authorities to do something. They say, it's the local authority to make its own determination on what type of housing it needs, where it should be built, and so on. And actually, I think over many, many decades of what I would consider not local authority failure, by the way, this is policy failure, both national and local policy failure. Somebody needs to take the bull by the horns and actually develop a policy that gives a very clear set of guidelines about what is expected to be delivered. And in doing that, you will be able to set the tone and give confidence to the institutional investment market, give confidence to developers that building is going to happen and it's available, and you'll be able to drive supply innovation, which helps to address the affordability of building and so on.
I suppose some would argue that that's what the NPPF is for, and then you get accused of overriding the whims of local people. But
I appreciate it is a fine balance, because local politicians are elected to act on behalf of their constituencies, but and there is always a but in the conversation. Unless somebody sets those clear guidelines, you're faced with a whole series of inactivity and uncertainty, and that's not good for the sector.
Can I answer the question? I mean, I think right homes and right places, with some exceptions, yes, but only by default, because we're not building enough homes. That's the problem. So we welcome the government's ambition to target 1.5 million. We welcome all the changes coming through. I'd love to be having a discussion around the right homes in the right places, because that means maybe there's an insufficient...
you need to move them around.
Exactly, whereas right now we need to build more of everything, and that's the real challenge. And when you look at the Zoopla research that David referenced earlier, that 48% where it costs more than it's worth, you get this really awkward divide where in the high value areas, well, you can afford to build them, but people can't afford to buy them. In the lower value areas, it's the opposite way around. And then you've got a risk of things being built in the wrong places. So that is almost a problem for the future that I'd like to be talking about, but we're so far away from that. And to your question, Florence, on the new build mortgages, like David, it is a question for the mortgage providers, but I've been led to believe that there is an over-cautious approach towards new build premiums on new build flats. But as I say, it would... I agree, it needs to be a question for them.
And just coming on to that, the Shared Ownership Council pointed out new supply makes only 10% of transactions, whereas 90% for existing homes. Do you feel that this is an issue with your members, David? And is there anything that could be done to address that new build premium?
Well, first of all, I mean, a new home is very different to an existing home. Obviously by definition, and that differential is about to grow when we eventually see the future home standard and start to see that new homes will have electric vehicle charging points that they already have, but photovoltaic panels on roofs and all of those kind of things. So the differential will grow. That is reflected sometimes in the price, so there is a premium, if you want to call it that, on a new build property. Our understanding is that it hasn't changed at all over recent times. In fact, I've sort of seen some research that suggests that it's lower now than it has been in the past. So, there is just a fact of life that they are different products.
Thank you very much for attending the session this morning. We did actually find the quote from the CMA, so I think maybe we'll just write to you and just clarify what they said. But really good discussion this morning. I think this will help us in terms of our deliberations and our final report. Order, order.